beginning of this campaign. Now it's the favourite in opinion polls. On a final push for votes in the capital Dublin, Miss MacDonald told me this election will mark the end of the country's current status quo.
Every campaign is different, and this campaign is about change. People have realised that after a century of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, the two big establishment parties having an overwhelming grip on politics and government, that they want an alternative, and lots of people tell us that we're it.
With 1 day to go, many voters remain undecided, but they are certain about one thing.
We need a change. We need someone different, big time. It's like, because it's just always been in the history of Ireland, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, you know, and we're hopping from one to the other and we're getting nowhere.
I'm in my late 20s now, and I feel like it's time for something to change anyway.
I think their perception, well certainly my perception, is that Micheál Martin, who's the main opposition, is just Leo in a different suit. You know, I think people are looking for change.
At the moment, the Prime Minister, or Taoiseach as he's called here, Leo Varadkar, and his centre-right party Fine Gael are in power at the Dáil, the Irish Parliament, propped up by fellow centrists and now biggest rivals, Fianna Fáil. But there's a growing sense of anti-establishment sentiment here. People are angry and fed up with the way things are and feel that pressing domestic issues such as a shortage of housing and a healthcare crisis are being ignored in favour of international concerns like Brexit.
Leo Varadkar maintains his party is the best to see Ireland through tough trade negotiations.
South Africa, this will be the second time that South Africa holds chairmanship of the continental body, after first doing so in 2002 when the AU succeeded the Organization of African Unity. CGTN's Ndamela was at Waterkloof Air Force Base as the South African president jetted off to Ethiopia for the summit.
South Africa is due to assume the chairship of the African Union this year at the 33rd Ordinary Session of the Continental Body. The AU summit is taking place in Addis Ababa this weekend. Taking up the AU chairship is a critical mission and/or task that the South African president has been anticipating for a while now.
We were asked by the continent to take on this task. We didn't put up our hand. The continent said, we'd like South Africa to chair the AU, and we took on the task. And admittedly, every challenge also presents an opportunity. So whilst we face challenges on the one side here at home, and whilst the continent also faces challenges, the flip side of those challenges are opportunities. And I believe that this is the moment for us to grasp the opportunities, to find solutions, working together and doing things together.
Ramaphosa is taking this enormous challenge at a time when his own country, South Africa, is facing economic challenges. It's also a challenging time for the continent.
Our continent faces interesting challenges, but we also have wonderful solutions for some of the challenges.
The summit is held under the theme, Silencing the Guns, creating conducive conditions for Africa's development.
The other important thing for us, of course, is the task of silencing the guns. Now, there are a number of conflicts that are still ongoing on the continent, and we are going to be working together with all countries to see how best we can bring peace to descend on many parts of our continent.
The president also pointed out that the summit also coincides with the end of the African Women's Decade and the 25th anniversary of the World Conference on Women, where UN member countries adopted the Beijing Platform for Action towards greater equality and opportunity for women. President Ramaphosa will also engage in a number of bilateral meetings with other heads of states and government on the sidelines of the summit and participate in the Presidential Infrastructure Champion Initiative event. Yolisa Njomela for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
Meanwhile, the African Union says its member states should take the first responsibility to address the problem of refugees on the continent. The Political Affairs Commission, in a press conference, said the union was working hand in hand with respective countries to address causes and management of refugees. Here's CGTN's Giram Chala with more.
Currently, there are more than 6.3 million refugees and 14.5 million internally displaced persons in Africa. And it's mainly countries like the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, Somalia and South Sudan which generate these refugees and IDPs. For AU, the situation is worrying and wants member states to take responsibilities.
The first responsibility to put an end to the problem of refugees. It was the states themselves. The Commission hasn't got weapons to organize conflicts with member states. But then the first responsibility is within member states to find the solutions. And so the Commission had worked, and you followed all that went on in the Central African Republic with the peace agreement that was signed, and the same thing for Sudan.
The Commissioner for Political Affairs of the African Union, Minata Samate, also said the solution of conflicts requires ample dialogue. Silencing the guns will put an end to the problem of refugees and IDPs.
There is a link between silencing the guns and then equally the problem of refugees. And we are asking also that we should allow Africa to bring her contribution to African problems, and especially with the African solutions. Just as we use the example of Libya, where the African Union and member states are asking to be part of the negotiations on the issue, because we have the feeling that it's not an African country, which is not the case. And then by silencing the guns in Libya, we shall silence the guns in the Sahel as well.
The complex African humanitarian situation is not always blamed on the conflicts of the continent. Climate change triggered drought and food shortages, as well as natural disasters, have a lot of contribution for the catastrophe. But Africa now needs more time to be on top of its refugee-related problems. Grumjara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
African leaders say resources are urgently needed for African states to effectively implement climate change mitigation measures. Foreign affairs ministers and climate change experts met ahead of the African Union summit in Addis to discuss the relationship between climate change and insecurity. Kuleta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
Africa has recent experience of multiple extreme weather events, including cyclones, floods and drought. The African Union says displacement, death and food insecurity because of climate-related issues are of great concern.
How, for instance, does Africa expect to be self-sufficient when our agriculture is being wiped away by droughts and floods, as well as climate-related pests, such as the fall armyworm and now the locust swarms ravaging parts of the Horn of Africa?
Delegates meeting at the African Union Commission say Africa needs approximately $7 to $15 billion annually from this year to close the financing gap on the continent.
We also need to improve the financial mechanisms, whether they be actions in terms of addressing climate emergencies or in terms of financing climate-resilient agriculture and other investments in activities that will improve our adaptation and our ability to thrive.
But the continent is concerned that a promise from developed countries to contribute to this has not been honored.
African countries have developed nationally determined contributions that are conditional to availability of financial support. And yet, we are being told to raise ambitions. How do we raise ambitions when the promised support, including the $100 billion per annum promised from 2020, has not yet been realized or has not been honored, or perhaps honored by the breach?
The leaders say a lack of statistics about hazards as they happen in parts of Africa makes effective responses tough. Apart from money, the African Union says the continent needs an envoy for climate change to spearhead advocacy and resource mobilization regionally and internationally. Climate change will be given priority when heads of state meet here for their summit on 9th and 10th of this month. Coletta Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
We move to Botswana now, which held its first auctions for the rights to hunt elephants since lifting a ban last year. The government sold 7 hunting licenses on Friday. It says this will allow hunters to kill 10 elephants in controlled hunting areas. Only companies registered in Botswana were allowed to bid for the licenses. The bidders put down a refundable deposit of $18,000. Botswana has around 130,000 elephants, which is the largest population in the world. Officials in the southern African nation say hunting is necessary to ease conflict between animals and humans, especially farmers who have seen their crop and infrastructure destroyed by elephants roaming outside their feeding zones. It's time now for us to take a short break. Business news when we return, including Tunisia's Nawara field officially enters gas production phase. And the U.S. plans a new free trade agreement with Kenya after Trump and Uhuru meet.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Time now for your business news. Production has officially begun at Tunisia's Nawara field. The production capacity of the field is estimated at 2.7 million cubic meters of gas per day. It's set to increase the North African economy's gas output by 50% and reduce its energy deficit by 20%. CGTN's Adnan Shuashi brings us up to speed with this development.
The project's production capacity is of 2.7 million cubic meters of gas per day, or 50% of the national production of additional gas, 7,000 barrels of oil, and 3,200 barrels of liquid gas.
The entry into production of the Nawara field will also reduce the energy deficit by 20% and the trade deficit by 7%, which will provide 1 point of growth for Tunisia.
The Nawara field was discovered in January 2006 as part of the Jinan al-Janoub Gardens of the South exploration permit. Subsequent drilling campaigns resulted in 8 more successful wells in 2010.
The Nawara concession was allocated by the Ministry of Industry to the Tunisian National Oil Company and Australian company OMV.
Initially scheduled for October 2019, the entry into operation of the Nawara field was postponed due to technical and social problems.
Tunisia relies on Algeria to meet its commitments in gas. The production in the south will revive the national economy and help us reach energy security.
The South Tunisian gas project comprises a central processing unit at the Nawara well site and 370-kilometer pipeline from Nawara to Gebes, where a gas processing unit will be set up. The Nawara Development Project is a strategic infrastructure project allowing for the development of gas resources in southern Tunisia. This field is part of the growth strategy for the Austrian company OMV in Africa and its portfolio of international activities. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
The United States and Kenya are negotiating a new agreement that could lead to the first American bilateral trade deal with a sub-Saharan African country. U.S. President Donald Trump and his Kenyan counterpart announced the intention after meeting in Washington. At the moment, Kenya is seeking to become a hub for U.S. companies doing business in Africa and beyond. The East African economy says it's keen to secure its economic future ahead of the expiry of the U.S.-Africa Growth and Opportunity Act in 2025. AGOA currently allows sub-Saharan African countries to export thousands of products to the United States without tariffs or quotas.
I'd just like to put away a few doubts, because there has been a feeling that by Kenya engaging with the United States to have a trade arrangement, we are running away from our commitments to the Africa Free Trade Arrangement. And I want to assure you that there can be nothing further from the truth, as that is definitely not the case. Kenya was not only in the forefront during the negotiations of the Africa Free Trade Agreement, but we were also amongst the first countries to sign, and indeed the first country to ratify the arrangement. And our commitment to the Africa Free Trade area is unwavering.
Time for us to take a quick break. When we return, here's what you can expect. A South African rapper creates music for people with hearing impairment.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
We often talk or refer to the sound of music without much thought, but listening pleasure. Sadly, many people take for granted the gift of hearing. More than 4 million people in South Africa are deaf or live with a hearing disability. A local rapper passionate about his music decided to find a way to get deaf people to appreciate his music. Sumitra Naidu tells us more.
He's a rapper and a poet, and now he's making music for the deaf.
The concept in itself really came around the idea of making more people aware of the fact that not enough hearing people know how to sign, and this is a problem in our community. So when I was approached, I was asked to write a track and then learn how to sign it. And I think that already showed the difficulties of how the process was to be able to be a hearing person and learn how to sign.
Lazarus Man teamed up with MTN and the deaf community in this initiative, and with new technology, they developed Deaf Bars, a track designed for those that have little or no hearing.
Yeah, it was a great experience, and I felt like, no, I have to do this and I have to accurately do it, because to show these people that we as deaf people, we can do this, because most of the time they feel like, no, deaf people are the people that stay home who knows nothing. So it was a stand for me to say, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it right, so that I can be able to open opportunities for other deaf people.
While this initiative was aimed at providing a form of music to the deaf, it was just as important to create more awareness around the stigma that still follows those affected.
The bass and the rhythm of the track as well can be heard by people that are actually hard of hearing, because you could hear it through the vibrations. So you could be hearing it, you see it at the same time, but they can also feel the bass and the rhythm at the same time. So it was more about to bring awareness, not just to deaf people, but to hearing people, that we need to do more work to understand the deaf community and make it a little bit more inclusive.
MTN also developed a USSD version of their emergency services lines, which allows hard of hearing and deaf South Africans to have access to the same services that all hearing South Africans enjoy.
Our collaboration with the deaf community, we obviously got exposed to a lot of the challenges that they're facing, and those challenges include accessing or having access to emergency services. That's something that I certainly, as a hearing-able person, take for granted. Technology has a unique role to play in solving some of those challenges. Our desire really is to bring the benefits of a modern connected life to every South African.
Deaf Bars is already on a new track, and a remix is on the way. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Sport action after the break. Here's what's coming up. Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal play to record crowd in Cape Town.
How would you create
your legend. On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Time now for some sport action. We begin in South Africa, where Roger